Hi, my name's Ian. Welcome to my channel, and this is it's probably going to be heavily edited because I bet it's going to turn into a ramble, but a sort of 2,000 subscriber special thing, even though now we're gone past 2,000 subscribers, now in sort of close, approaching 2,500, and it's something that took me by surprise, really. Maybe it shouldn't do, or whatever, but I never really set out to to get anywhere with it. It was just a bit of a fun learning thing to do. But yeah, now I kind of try and take it a little bit more seriously than I did. However, right, what I decided to do, lots of people left some comments and things, about 20 odd comments or so, on the community tab. So I thought I'd go through some of those and answer some questions that are on there, or delve into some of the things that are on there in maybe a bit more depth, or a bit more rambling than just scribbling a reply to the thing. So since everyone seems to be, oh, not everyone, since one person seems to be obsessed with my teacups, here's one of my favourite cups, bunch of knots on it, and because I'm a scout leader, I don't know if anyone has picked that up. It's in my bio somewhere or whatever. But one of my primary vocations in life is as a scout leader, which probably means something completely different in the US than it does in the UK. But by the by, we're all the same movement to the top of it. So without sort of rambling on too much, let's just go through and read some of these comments. And excuse me if I do this quite a lot. I'm old, so varifocals are the thing, and screens at different angles, and I'm all over the place. Right. So, Fred Daniel 5099, he says, congratulations on reaching a well-deserved master. Oh, thank you very much. It's a surprise for me, but I appreciate all of the well-wishing and everything else. When a channel has a quality content, word gets around. Quality content. Okay, thank you for that. As for a special video, I think it might be nice to have a peek into one of your personal homebrew settings, or a campaign recap, or perhaps a narrative of your journey within the hobby, the channel, and lessons learned along the way, if you can share. Well, for one of my personal homebrews, I tend to have a one homebrew setting that has gone through several different games. I'm currently putting together a BRP. It's been done with RingQuest before, but I'm currently putting together BRP for it because the new BRP rule set I'm enjoying quite a lot, and coupled with the fact that it's now open using the Orc license, Paizo's version of the OGL. It's given me a little bit of a kick to try and put it together, but it's been going for quite some time, and has amassed quite a lot of material. Some of it I've rewritten several times over the time, which is something that infuriates my wife, because she feels that I should just stick to the notes I've got and finish off the bits and pieces I've got instead of constantly changing things around. But I find that campaign setting, it's largely an early medieval type thing. So I wanted to move away from things like plate and stuff, but I didn't want to go the RuneQuest direction of Bronze Age, because my own personal historical interest lies with the Celts and with the Saxons and the Vikings and so on. It's that sort of slice of period from around about 300 AD to around about 1100 AD. So that's my primary interest of history, and therefore I feel better with that kind of thing. I think Dungeons and Dragons, the general, for a start, I think too much lore has been put into the Dungeons and Dragons game as it is. I think it should be a set of rules that, and you've got D&D should be a set of generic rules that people put their own lore on, hence like the number of campaign settings were around at the time, and that's kind of what we had right at the beginning of Dungeons and Dragons. But as opposed to games like Call of Cthulhu and RuneQuest and so on, that are written for a specific setting. If that makes any sense. I think, generic rules, not generic rules, because that goes into the realm of GURPS and stuff, but rules that are upon which a game master, referee, whatever you want to call it, can then build their own things on top of, I think are undervalued in the current day and age. So my personal fantasy style homebrew setting is very much that sort of, we can't call it Dark Ages anymore, but it is Dark Ages type of affair. It's not historically accurate. It's not. I haven't just lifted up that period of history and then transformed it into something else. It's informed by that period. Some of it is my own experimentation. Some of it is like speculation on what would a Celtic-like culture have developed into had it not had that Roman influence. The British Isles came under a lot of Roman influence, and the Britons, who were a Celtic people, were ruled by the Romans for a few centuries, and they developed in a certain way, this Romano-Briton culture that predated the Saxons and the Germanic people coming in and changing the country again. So that's one of the premises, looking at how that Celtic culture, might have developed without Roman influence. And some of it is about, more on the interaction of peoples and things like this. So I quite like that cultural interaction that you get, especially the mix of cultures that we had in this country, the UK, back in that period, that sort of 600 odd year period, 6 to 800 year period, where you had lots of different influence coming over. You had the Britons and the Welsh and the Scots and so on who had come from all over the place to start with, and then you got another series of settlers and cultural waves and mixing and everything else. So that interests me a lot. So therefore, my own homebrew fantasy campaign setting has a lot of those elements, a lot of different cultures and intermixing and how that all sort of interplay with smaller kingdoms rather than large nations and that sort of thing. Low tech, reasonably high magic, so there is a lot of magical premise to the world. Some of it that again is informed by British folklore and Germanic folklore, because that's what I know and kind of grew up with. Some of it's like taken from other bits and pieces that have interested me in periods of history, random elements over time. I have come up with a number of different settings for different games. For example, a Traveller game where within Traveller, the setting that I've had most fun with has been out Gateway sector, so in that sort of away from the to my mind too developed part of the Spinwood Marches, and more in the underdeveloped part of the training sectors like Gateway and Ley sector and so on around that. But I've also come up with my own one. There is a something that mirrors Gateway a little bit in this a pocket empire type thing. Lots of little interstellar nations of maybe half a dozen worlds each or so, but banded together under an overarching political entity. So unlike the Third Imperium, which is a bit more unified, this is more smaller polities that have an overarching thing. It's called the Lucidian Empire. That's one thing. And I've also had one that's more of a deep space type thing where it's incumbent on the player characters to work out where they are and what they're doing, and all they had at the beginning of it. So they came out of cryostasis or low birth or whatever you want to call it, with total memory loss, and all each player had. So they didn't have character sheets. Excuse me. They didn't have character sheets. They didn't have any information on their characters whatsoever, other than a barcode. And that barcode, well, it told me who they were to start with. But there were specific things that went into that barcode. So one of the first things, well, in experimenting with the ship itself, one of the things that they had to do was to try and decode what this barcode meant, because they couldn't remember what it was in reference to. They didn't know what, as it was, parts of the barcode actually referred to their universal personality profile, which Traveller uses to define characteristics. Part of it was some of their skill experiences, their specialised areas and position within the ship. But by which time they had already figured out some of it, in terms of they worked out that so-and-so seems to be good at doing this particular thing, since they've succeeded at doing that particular thing a couple of times, navigation and that kind of thing. And so therefore they must be the navigator. It turns out that they had some lucky rolls, and they put the medic in the navigator position and what have you. But it was interesting starting from that. You don't know who you are. It's not like I'm giving you. Well, I was giving them pre-generated characters, but they had no clue what those pre-generated characters were, except for this barcode, and I didn't tell them what the barcode was in reference to at all. It was just, hey, we're going to sit down, play a role-playing game. Your base mechanic is to roll 2 6-sided dice. I'll tell you what the results mean. And by the way, you each wake up with this barcode on you. What other settings have I sort of come up with? There's one called Tracks, which was entirely set in a chasm. Not quite Underdark wise, but it was these civilizations that had grown up within this chasm type idea, and they're all fighting over resources. I never really got to work out whether they were living in the chasm because that's what they did and that's what the societies were, or whether they were living in the chasm because the surface of whatever planet or world or whatever they're living on had been annihilated. But the campaign didn't really get that far. But it was interesting for a while. It didn't last a huge length of time. What other settings have I come up with? Oh, Dark Yorkshire. Yes, so that World of Darkness stuff, and I didn't necessarily agree with some of the things that White Wolf had put out in reference to either Britain or Yorkshire itself. Not there was much on Yorkshire, but there was some. Didn't necessarily agree on it, and I'm not sure who wrote those bits, but apologies if this actually reaches the person that read it, that wrote those sections on Britain, and they turn out that they were actually someone from Yorkshire or whatever. But a lot of it seemed to misunderstand some of the places in Yorkshire, and especially some of the supernatural stories that were going on behind the real life area. Not that I particularly believe that supernatural stuff is real, but that's another thing. Yorkshire is rife with supernatural tales, and especially the areas of Yorkshire that I particularly love, which are the moors and the dales. I'm very much a country person, so wild, remote areas are pretty much my thing. So yes, that was a dark medieval Vampire the Dark Ages setting mixed in with a bit of werewolf stuff. Campaign recap. Oh god. There are so many. I don't know about recaps. I'd have to dig into all sorts of archaic notes and things. I'm a big fan of campaign settings changing. I mean, I've prodded and poked and things by campaign setting, but I think the actions of characters should also, the player characters that is, should also change the nature or the direction of the history of a setting, or what's going on in the world. They should have an impact in some way. Maybe localized at before they are becoming global spanning heroes and stuff, but as they gain in power and fame and glory, and things should get more and more and more impact at a larger level. So a lot of the even though I've changed some elements of it, what I prefer to do is come up with with the intended trajectory of the bad guys. You know, I'm not a fan of this. Let's come up with a big bad evil, whatever the acronym for it these days is, and that big bad evil, like the nearly every campaign is that you read now is like, you know, this powerful vampire is doing this powerful lich is doing this powerful five-headed dragon goddess is doing this, or it sort of gets a bit, well, you know, same plot different day, or different plot same day, or however. What I find much more interesting, like I said about the general scope of my campaign setting, where you've got the machinations between these small kingdoms and petty kings as they're trying to break out and become more powerful and land grab each other, and cultures clashing with each other. I much prefer things that way. So instead of some mega uber powered thing that the characters only kind of hear about in hearsay when they're low level, but then get to face on when they hit 20th level and things, that's sort of so overdone. I much prefer to have nations and agencies of nations, and it's not a big bad evil monster that is doing stuff. It is the agencies of a nation trying to undermine the agencies of another nation, and the player characters then get the option of which particularly agency that they follow, you know, and therefore the success or failure of the agencies becomes part of their narrative, or the narrative that they are driving, and therefore the histories of the nations that belong to those agencies becomes indirectly or directly affected by the actions of the characters. I find that much more interesting, because it's playing the world, playing the setting, instead of here's a story with a definite endpoint, which is this 50 hit dice monster over here. It becomes more of a here is a world, here is the situation within the world, what are you going to do about it? And the players get to see their actions shaping the world. So I could go through campaign recaps. I'd have to think of that one, because there's quite a few. I prefer the anecdotal stuff. Some of the anecdotal stuff that players, different players have come and gone. It's not this campaign that's had the same players for 4 decades or more. Different players have come in, made their mark, gone, so on. So it's always a different makeup over the years, which is great, because it means there's been more different influences coming in. Different people's ideas have shaped and the way certain things have gone. But there are some brilliant ones. I've had some completely insane players over time. As one, I'll tell you an anecdote about the adamantine coffin at some point, because that's hilarious. The game Show AU. My journey in the hobby. My journey in the hobby. Let's go back to that. There's still on Fred here. My journey in the hobby starts with my dad's bookshelf, and that's a major influence in my life, because on his bookshelf were Asimov. So I read a lot of science fiction when I was a kid. Heinlein, Asimov, Doc Smith. My reading age was always higher than my actual age when I was a kid. They used to have these book club things where you chose a handful of books out of this magazine thing, and then you ordered them through the school and we also had lessons, English literature lessons, where we weren't pulling apart some bit of Shakespeare, but the lesson was just about bring the book you're currently reading and read it, and then you get to talk to the English teacher about it and that. And I had a book called The Fight of Neither Century from one of these club things, which was a compilation of science fiction short stories. And the English teacher was adamant that this book was too young for me, and so dragged me to the school library and gave me a copy of Gormenghast. And if you know that Mervyn Peake trilogy, Gormenghast, Titus Grown and Titus Alone. It's grim. I read that when I was quite young. Lord of the Rings I read when I was quite young. But Lord of the Rings, actually my gran gave me a copy of that. My first copy of that. My dad's bookshelf was more Pulp Fiction side of things. So he had a lot of Fritz Leiber, Heinlein Asimov, and so on, as I said. Some of these Nebula Award-winning short story compilations that they used to do in pulp paperback form as well, and they were great. Also, some of the Gore books, which probably wasn't healthy reading when I was a kid, but there you go. So that's kind of where it started. So from there, the interest in science fiction, mainly. Fantasy came a bit later, but mainly science fiction. Things like Howard, Conan, stuff like that, I discovered via Dungeons and Dragons. So Lieber, the Fafard and the Grey Mouse stuff I read before discovering that role-playing games were even a thing, and then Howard, it was after that. Some point between Dungeons and Dragons and the Schwarzenegger Conan movie coming out was my introduction to Conan. But anyway, I knew about Conan before the movie came out, but I didn't before getting into Dungeons and Dragons. Anyway, that's totally off the beaten track. I asked my scouting team the way my brain jumps all over the place. I'm not diagnosed with anyone, but with anything, but people do utterly convinced that I've got ADHD or one of the funny acronymy type things. So anyway, from this love of science fiction and fantasy, when you go into magazine shops and comic shops, newsagents and things, there's these big racks of magazines that you get. And going into one of them in Scarborough, and there was a comic called 2000 AD. And that, I started reading that fairly regularly. 2000 AD is a comic where Judge Dredd comes from. And also a magazine called White Dwarf, which I believe is still going today. It was last time I checked, but it's more a vehicle for Warhammer these days. But back in those days, it was Games Workshop produced it and it covered a number of games. And they were at that time a game shop. They sold role-playing games and games of all sorts of different types. They weren't so much their own publisher as yet, other than White Dwarf. And then eventually they started producing their own games, and then mid-80s Warhammer came along, and then the rest is kind of history. That's their sole focus these days. But back then they didn't have any of games of their own per se. I think they'd either in the throes of buying Citadel or had some relationship with Citadel then. So the miniature side was a bit of a sideline for them, and White Dwarf was really it was an amazing thing. If you're wondering where, it's one of the things that I kind of despair at a little bit in the hobby at the moment. Is when you talk to people about role-playing games and the only one they know is the current edition of Dungeons and Dragons, and they are very kind of it's all 5th edition D&D, 5th edition D&D, and or even when they're talking about Pathfinder is an iteration of 3rd edition D&D. So we really have 3rd, 4th, and 5th edition D&D is in one form or another, whether it's called Pathfinder or not, and all the OGL games as well, the OSR, which are either retro clones or reimaginations of Dungeons and Dragons. So the 99% of the games out there are some derivative of Dungeons and Dragons. Whereas back then, Dungeons and Dragons may have been one of the major players, but you had so many different games, and White Dwarf reflected that. So in an issue of White Dwarf, wait a second, right, this is where all the editing, hopefully you won't get all of this, me wandering around my office so much. So here we go, a random issue of White Dwarf. Yes, I still have a ton of old White Dwarf magazines because I looked after them, except my sister kindly made me this with my name in it, when we were younger. It's effectively a marmalade pot that has been sticky back plastic with a number of things on there, but what she did, she got a load of White Dwarf and Dragon magazines that I had back in the day, thinking that they were just magazines or comics. It doesn't matter if I go and cut them up and decorate a pot with, but you know. So thanks, sis. But the mangled magazines from that period. Were later replaced, but White Dwarf is still one of my references that I go back to quite a lot. So this is issue 54 from June. Oh, got to be 82, 83, rough guess. When we're looking at 84, June 84. I was 2 years out. But regardless, this is what I want to show you. This is the table of contents for this one magazine. So in this one particular magazine, we have articles on RuneQuest. There's a general article on creating logical fantasy worlds. There's fantasy worlds where you haven't just thrown the kitchen sink in them, so they don't make any sense. Maybe fun to play, but they don't actually make any internal sense. A name of the game, which is something by Marcus Rowland, where he just went through various role-playing games and described a little bit about them. Castle of Lost Souls, which is a sort of fighting fantasy solo adventure game. The Temple of the Doom Prince, which was a dual system scenario for both Advanced Dungeons & Dragons and RuneQuest. Microview about computers. Tabletop Heroes about miniatures. Open Box, which is a game of reviewing games. Critical Mass, which is reviewing fiction books. Rune Rights, which is a column about RuneQuest. Fiend Factory, which was, if you know what the Fiend Folio is, for Dungeons and Dragons from Advanced Dungeons and Dragons back in the day, that had its sort of beginnings in Fiend Factory, which is it was a monster column for Dungeons and Dragons, and then a bunch of other stuff. So it's lots of different games were reflected, and the first whole bit, in order to get this magazine sorted out, the first mass of it, is before we get to the table of contents, is all adverts. This will become pertinent in a mo. So seeing covers like this wasn't the issue that I came into White Dwarf on, by the way. It's just the one that I've randomly pulled out of my my White Dwarf collection. But it's looking at covers like this on the shelf and going, wow, that looks really cool. So this is my route into role playing. That looks really cool. Let's go and have a look what this is like, and then your first pages of this thing is all adverts, and that's kind of how the magazine started off. So you'd look at these adverts. So within the magazine itself, it would go on about this game called RuneQuest, or this game called Traveller, or this game called Dungeons and Dragons, or whatever, and you'd sort of find, well, what the hell is this about then? And because the articles are fun to read, and the bits about fantasy world building and things are quite fun. I wish I'd picked up an earlier copy. Maybe I'll ever pick up an earlier edition. You got me here, don't panic. Oh, this is a bit more like it. Okay, so something earlier, issue 29. This is February 1982. Okay, so February 1982. It was a bit after I got into role-playing games, but it's this sort of thing. So you got this, right, and you think, oh, this is pretty cool. Then you got there is a Traveller scenario in here called Weed War, right? So you start off by reading through the scenarios, and you think, well, okay, I don't understand all these numbers and stuff. I don't know what they're doing, but the story behind this looks really cool, and it looks like the game. Though this is fun. And we used to play chess at school and stuff like that. So games, well into games, brought up with board games as well. So both my parents, we used to sit down as a family and play a lot of board games. So this looked games that were fun, that tied into this fantasy and science fiction stuff I'd picked off my dad's bookshelf, with a whole bunch of stuff that I didn't really understand. So the next thing you do is you go, well, what the hell are these games then? And then you find an advert like this at the front, which is this is how role-playing games were marketed back in the day. So you've got in here that little block there for Traveller, where it's advertising 50 star bases, the IISS ship files, the personal data files, starship layout, things, blah, 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 blah. Oh, that's all the stuff. I want the not Traveller Adventures, Traveller science fiction role playing in the far, far future. Traveller the box set for £5.95. So you'd save your pocket money up, and you'd write to Games Workshop, mail orders to London before they turned up in Nottingham. You write off to them, and you'd say, "Look, I want this," and they'd go, "Yeah, fine." Yeah, you used to pay with them with things you got from the post office, which you gave the post office some money, and they would give you like a purchase order thing for that amount of money. What are they called? Can't remember what they're called. But you used to send them off in the mail to Games Workshop or some other company that had a game that caught your eye, and then you got this strange game called Traveller come back through the post, and with these funny little solid wall of text. Have I? Not quite sure where my old Traveller books would be. They are around somewhere. But anyway, so they would come through, these little black books. The Traveller players will know what I mean. So as a kid, I was like 8 or 9 or something like that, reading through these books, and my tiny little mind was a bit blown away, because I'd just that sort of junior school level of maths that was going on, with a game that had some fair old mathematical stuff. That in Traveller you had this formula that was, if you're travelling between 2 points and in space, in inner system space rather than interstellar space, then you would accelerate all the way up to the centre point between those two, and then you decelerate. So there's a formula that says this is the acceleration capability of my spaceship. This is how much fuel I need, and this is how long it's going to take me to get between these 2 points by accelerating at maximum and then decelerating from there on, from the midpoint on. And so maths like that was pretty mind blowing for an 8-year-old. But battled through it. Probably gave me I love numbers and maths and things, so probably gave me a little bit of that. Certainly gave me a love for statistics, because a big chunk of my formal education things is down to statistics and analytical mathematics. So it was yeah. So that's my kind of route in. It is Dad's bookshelf to being enamoured by that sort of fantasy and science fiction type of stuff, to then going and seeing interesting covers, or picking up 2000 AD, enjoying the stories in that, seeing the covers of White Dwarf, thinking it's pretty cool. It actually says it's like the science fiction and fantasy magazine. It does say games and miniatures, I'm not sure if but anyway, tying that together, then finding these games or reading scenarios in the magazine that looked fun, and just wanting to understand what the rules were that were governing these things, and then going and ordering those rules. So that was the early route in. The next step from there was talking to friends. There was one of my longest standing friends used to play Dungeons and Dragons with a American family that the father, adult, whatever, of that family was working for the United States Air Force in the UK. So they took him and were playing this game, Dungeons and Dragons. So he was talking to me about Dungeons and Dragons, I was talking to him about Traveller in the middle of a field one night. I spent quite a lot of my time in the middle of fields, and up hills and stuff. But that's all sounded quite fun, so I started playing the sort of fantasy versions of that. So Dungeons & Dragons first, then when things like the solo game books, so Tunnels and Trolls about the mid-80s, RuneQuest about the mid-80s, and then just other games. Through things like White Dwarf, you got introduced to a wide variety of different games, and I think that's sadly lacking in the world today. There are some really fantastic games out there, and no real solid vehicle like White Dwarf was to bring that all together, and no real desire so much in a vast amount of the player base to try anything new out. They've got their sort of Dungeons and Dragons stuff, and that's really all they want to do, and I think that's quite sad. And not just from the difference in experience and stuff like that, but it's like playing other games can inform the games that you really want to play. So, for example, I go through this BRP iteration of my own campaign setting. Going through that, a lot of it is informed by what I love about Rollmaster, by what I love about Dungeons and Dragons, so it's not just I'm taking BRP and then adapting my setting to it. It's I'm taking BRP and then adapting BRP to some of the ideas that I have that formulate the world itself, some of which have been influenced by other games. So, yeah, well, not just games, but the historical side of it, novels, and all sorts of things that you pick up over time. So yeah, I think this sort of insular, I only like these games and that's it sort of way, and especially edition wars. Edition wars wear me down. People just completely hammering a particular edition of D&D because it's not what they think D&D should be, or not what this game should be, or what have you, is an utter waste of time. People enjoy games because it says something to them, and I think every single game, regardless of whether I like it or not, don't mistake me picking up a game, and I try not to do games that I don't like, at least in some way, on this channel. I'm certainly not one of those that wants to go down the negative reviewing for clicks, or let's go and bash this particular company because they've done something wrong and everyone's talking about it, and so the YouTube algorithm will give me more views because I'm doing exactly the same. That's just boring, just utter boring. So you want to go and jump on a corporation and kick them because they're trying to do what corporations try to do, which is please the most number of people and sell the most amount of stuff. It's a bit kind of pointless. What I'd rather do is just explore the rich tapestry of games that are out there, and other subjects as well. It's not just games that I mess around with on this channel. So there's always something good in every single game if you look. And there's always some learning process, and each game plays differently, and some people prefer one game over another, and that's fine. It doesn't make that particular game better than that game, because that's an incredibly subjective view. So if you're saying I don't know, 3rd edition is the best edition of Dungeons and Dragons ever, well, that may be true for you, but it's not necessarily going to be true for someone else. The fact that the 5th edition books have got the greatest role-playing game as okay, that's very subjective, and it all depends on the criteria you're measuring that from. Right, anyway, so that's my route in through the hobby back in the late 70s. The channel, I originally set this channel up for music, and you see some of the early videos are all about music, because I wanted somewhere to play with and to be able to stretch and learn things about recording in a home recording sense. So a lot of my setup, microphones and stuff like that is all for the production of music. As it happens, it's sort of production from somewhere else. And at one point, I started to downsize. I still am going through that process, really, downsizing my game collection, largely from the fact that I can't fit new stuff in that I want to read. So I'm going through a process of, or have been for quite some time now, of picking things up, looking at them and going, will I ever use this? Have I ever used this? will I ever use this? Will I ever find this useful again? And if it doesn't answer some of those questions to the positive, then it's either going to a game specialist or up onto eBay. But I thought when I was going through that process, it would be nice to at least have some archive of games that I've been into. Now, don't think that every game I cover on this I'm selling. That's not what this is about. But it does give me the opportunity to revisit some of those things that I am dragging out of the mess that is my office and the boxes of stuff that I've got floating around. Pick them up, read through them again, get reacquainted with some games that I haven't played for a while, and just as part of the process, the downsizing process, also make a bit of an archive stuff. And people seem to enjoy what I'm doing, so that's the sort of channel stuff. The lessons learned about I have learned so much about video stuff. Never really did any video stuff before. Music side of things. I mean, photography and that lot was a bit of a dark science to me. Still is. I'm having fun playing around with videos and trying different things out and trying different effects out and things. I'm not a natural videographer. There's all this stuff I keep trying to read about camera angles and what to do with this and what to do with that. But slowly but surely, maybe I'll pick stuff up. But I've mainly learned a hell of a lot about video editing and combining sound with video as well. So it's all good stuff. On the YouTube side of front, I did buy when I started getting into this, and when the subscriber count started going up, and I started panicking that I might have to do it properly, so to speak. I did buy a YouTube for Dummies book. Not even sure where that is now. But I read through some of the bits there, and nearly everything that it was saying to do, I was sitting there going, I don't want to do that. That's just, everyone's doing that. And I think it is. This is what happens. When you've got something like YouTube, where there is an algorithm that is working in the background, and there is that drive for popularity. So in order to make a YouTube channel mega successful or make a living out of it, or all that kind of stuff, which a lot of people are doing, and it's great. But if you're going to do that, then you've got to chase popularity. If you've got to chase popularity, then you're not necessarily doing what you want to do. I come from the punk generation, and doing what we wanted to do, musically and everything else, is part of that DNA. So sitting there, this is part of the reason why I don't want to jump on this. Let's go and bash this particular company bandwagon, or let's go and bash this particular game bandwagon, or anything like that, because it just doesn't interest me. If I wanted thousands of views on the people that have already watched thousands of videos that are covering exactly the same subjects, maybe I'll do that, but it doesn't interest me, so therefore I'm not interested in making videos about it. Like I've said before, maybe it should interest me, but as far as I'm concerned, that I've got plenty of material up here to last me my gaming days out and until I am 6 foot under the ground. And I do get excited by some releases, but a lot of the releases, do you know that kind of saying, horrible saying, that you get old enough to have seen everything before? I get that with some games. It's like when it's like, oh, this fantastic new, go into Facebook ones in capitals saying, buy this now, or level up your game. And you think, oh God, it's the same old tat that it used to be. That's starting getting into a doldrummy type thing there, but yeah, there we go. There's a lot of samey stuff out there, so I get really excited when something new, when something old has been done in a really cool way, a really cool new way, or when something completely new comes out the woodwork, and you think that's love that. Some quick random sort of case in point, like the 4th edition of Twilight 2000, Free League's version of Twilight 2000. The earlier editions of Twilight 2000, they were quite, minutiae, and the survival techniques and the game of surviving this post World War III type thing. And then Twilight 2000, the Free League version comes out, and you're using the sort of not quite the sort of same stress mechanics as in the Alien game that they put in, but it's all of that home system that Free League do really does suit that bringing the narrative of that post World War III setting together. So that's pretty cool. And the new Glorantha Cults books. I mean, the Cults of Glorantha side of things has been around for years and years and years, but the way they are doing it now, the way they are expressing that material and compiling it, I think is fantastic. So there's new stuff that's really cool, old stuff that's been done in a new way. That's what wows me now. The same stuff that's been done in a similar way, but just with prettier art. Not really that bothered.